Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, we have attorney Paul Morantz, who litigated against coercive groups. One of the main subjects we discuss is the group Synanon, started by Charles Diederich. The following audio is of Charles Diederich talking over the wire to members of Synanon, threatening violence against antagonists of the group. After the audio of Charles Diederich, there will be a 3-hour discussion with Paul Morantz concerning his 2 books and his experiences litigating against coercive groups. This interview will only be 1 hour. The following 2 hours can be found on my YouTube channel at William Ramsey Investigates. Thank you very much.
And I keep thinking of the militant posture. Militant defenses, don't tread on me, or something like that. And that's what I think is. I think we must do that. I think we must do that. And I think taking this kind of a posture will decimate our population once again. Because it means doing something, which is, doing something different, which is the most frightening thing in an other-directed society, other-directed mentality, being at all eccentric. And I think it will decimate our population, which will be good. There are lots of people who don't know who they are yet. Some of them are in Synanon, not too many, but they're looking for an aggressive, militant, religious posture, not lying down with the man, and not passive, religion, not turn the other cheek to religion, but that is traditional religion in the main. That does not mean that is the only religious posture. Not at all. It just happens to be to have been the convention of the one that broke down. Now, I think we're we'll go over to the other side, and I propose that we be in the vanguard of that movement. We've already tested it out in various small, tiny, minuscule ways by beating up the Danube punks, by beating up the San Francisco punks, by chasing the dingbats around with our hay rooms and so on. We're beginning now, most ineptly, to throw people downstairs in Santa Monica. We won't be as inept at this in another 6 months. We will not be inept at all. And I think that we could, without too much effort, get a reputation that will be all over the United States within 1 year's time. Don't fuck with Synanon in any way. I think that's what that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to bring that about. I think that is the new religious posture. We'll see. Maybe I'm right. I think we will bring that about. We started quite a while ago with the Imperial Green Deal and so on. We're doing that, taking our best people, putting them into this kind of situation. And it is our intention to do just exactly that. We're not going to mess with the old time, turn the other cheek, and religious posture. Our religious posture is don't mess with us. You can get killed, dead, physically dead. And we're going to crack some bones. Not too many, you don't have to. man. And we're going to react to all aggression toward us. We either think we have a good thing here or we don't. If we have a good thing here, then we're not going to permit people like greedy lawyers to destroy it. And we're going to make certain that they don't and that their friends know about it.
The preceding audio was of Charles Diederich, founder and head of Synanon. Now on to the interview with Paul Morantz. The book that I read was Escape, My Lifelong War Against Cults, written by attorney Paul Morantz. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this book and your life as an attorney who fought cults. I read the book over the last week. It's a fantastic read, really interesting. But I would suspect much of this audience hasn't heard your name. If you could give us a little background about yourself, how you got into the law, where you grew up, things like that, that would be great.
Sure. But first, let me correct you that I would not describe myself as being part of the anti-cult movement. Okay. A movement is actually what the book complains about, the more accurate description for a cult. And there is an anti-cult movement, okay. And sometimes it takes on the same characteristics of a cult, black and white thinking, the ends justify the means, and led to a period that's sort of past now of kidnapping, deprogrammings, and I was never a part of that.
Okay,
I was someone who tried to educate people about the dangers of cults.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that clarification, but tell the audience a little bit about your background, where you grew up, etc.
I grew up in West Los Angeles. I went to Hamilton High School. My dream was to go to USC, and there I was sports editor and good friend of John McKay's and O.J. Simpson, and it was a very fun time of life. I decided that I wanted to be a writer, and I thought that's what I was going to do in life, but it was so much fun at USC. I went to law school so I could hang around another 3 years,
Gotcha.
This was like 1967 to 68, we're still talking about, the time of, the revolution, girls in short skirts, and it was just a great time to be a teenager and be young. You don't want necessarily to have it in quickly.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. I mean, the law students on a campus are kind of like the big men on campus too, right?
Oh, yeah, somewhat. I mean, there was a certain group of undergraduate girls that always managed to study in the law school library, and when we walked in, we could identify them and their presence by their perfume.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Well, tell us a little bit about what happened when you graduated from USC. How did you kind of get started in these cult-related cases?
Well, you first have to start with, personality. Put it in contrast, in 2011, in the book you read, I was very concerned at that point about the type of movies that were being made at that time, which centered on the bad guys as being the heroes, and worried about what effect that would have on future generations. Although it seemed as fast as I wrote that, the movie swung back to doing movies about heroes again. But I grew up at a time in the 50s that you saw television, you saw John Wayne. A big thing in my life was when I was 9 years old, watching the episodes of Davy Crockett and Walt Disney's Wild World of Color. And all those things had sort of great effects on me. And I remember seeing the Audie Murphy story. If you know who Audie Murphy is.
He was the World War II military fighter, is that correct?
Yeah. And so these were my heroes. And yet I never felt that I could be a Audie Murphy type or a John Wayne. And I certainly wasn't a match for Davy Crockett. although he was the one I admired the most because he had these principles, be sure you're right and then go ahead. And so when the big thing was when Al Pacino played Serpico in the movie Serpico.
Yes.
I must have watched that 3 times, read the book, and it was, I felt that I could do that, and that I probably would like doing that, and that what Serpico did was it wasn't a physical, he's going out and attacking the Indians. It was, he was gathering the facts and bringing the evidence, and no one could make him quit, even if he lost his girlfriend, everything, and so Serpico was sort of became my idol, and it was always sort of in the back of my mind that if I was ever placed in a situation that he was and had that type of information, I would do the same thing that he would do.
Gotcha.
And I guess that the first incident, when I was 26 years old and I was a public defender, we had this crazy judge, Noel Cannon, who was locking people up and locking me up. And she carried a Derringer in her purse, and her name was Noel Cannon. We used to call it Cannon's Law. She even made Time magazine saying that all the lawyers were intimidated by her. And when she locked up one of my clients to get back at me because I ran an appeal to get him out of jail when the investigators had actually cleared him, and she had him locked up. And at that point, I began to do investigation on her and prepare a report to show that she knew that his case had been dismissed and that he had been cleared when she locked him up. And that led to a hearing eventually in which she became the 3rd judge in California to be removed from the bench.
Interesting.
And I think that sort of cemented my personality, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Then I had success in writing, and I'd written a story that was being published in Rolling Stone. I'd written some other stories published in West. I had an agent. I had people wanting me to write books. I was starting to work on a screenplay, and I thought this is where I wanted to go in life.
Right.
And
that was about Jan and Dean, right? Jan and Dean?
Yeah, about Jan and Dean.
Gotcha.
And so then the strange thing happens is that through a Skid Row alcoholic named T.B. Renfro makes a phone call from Golden State Manor to a liquor store operator in downtown Los Angeles. They weren't allowed, the Skid Row alcoholics, to use the phones, but one nurse let him make a call, and he said to the operator that I'm being held prisoner here. He called my brother, and I managed to get hold of a nurse at the place, and
right.
She confirmed to me that there was a whole series of Skid Row alcoholic people that she believed there was no reason for them to be there. It was a mental ward, and that they had been brought strangely by this man named Weldon. She had done a little investigation and found out that they arrived the same day that they left prison for drinking.
Interesting.
So I thought they were probably there on probation. I just didn't understand it. On probation, a judge can say, instead of a jail or for a shorter jail sentence, you agree to go spend time in a nursing home. But that's still voluntary. They can still walk out. It just would mean they'd be breaking the conditions of probation, and they could be sentenced. But I figured it was something that probably everyone involved didn't really understand. I wasn't really ready to think that people could kidnap Skid Row alcoholics to make money off of them. It just didn't seem like that was a likely thing.
Right.
But then the thing that changed, I guess, the course of my life was the next Saturday. There was a story in the LA Times. They arrested X-ray operator, guy does portable X-rays at nursing homes, because he hired a hitman to assassinate the administrator of Ranchos Los Amigos. And the reason for that is that the administrator was going to testify that the X-ray lab portable guy was trying to bribe him to send certain long-term patients to certain nursing homes.
Gotcha.
And when I thought, wow, if that's going on in that industry, maybe I should call back that nurse again. And I was to spend about 2.5, 3 months pretty intensely researching, finding former employees at the nursing home. I finally found a bookkeeper who, for her own safety, kept copies of the payoff checks to the capper who brought the bodies to the nursing homes, where they were being filled with Thorazine. And when I finally had it all put together and knew exactly what was going on, that there was this conspiracy to kidnap Skid Row alcoholics to fill the beds so they could collect the money from Medi-Cal, Medicare, and Social Security, I knew that once I went down for my one client, T.B. Renfro, to get him out, that they'd let all the others out and that they would destroy the records. So I took everything to the health department and laid it all out for them. And they said, what do you want us to do? And I said, I want you to come with me when I go to get my client out, because you have the power to grab the records before they destroy them. Right. And so that was the start. And so for 2.5 years, I was involved in that case. I had Skid Row alcoholics living in my apartment at times when their depositions were taken to make sure they stayed sober. I sort of became their babysitter. And when that case was over, I was sort of a local celebrity, not a national celebrity, but a local celebrity. You know, I was known to the health department. I was known to the county council. I attended many hearings. And so I had a lot of people sort of believing in me.
Gotcha.
But I thought that was my last of it. I thought, okay, I did my Serpico thing. You know, they could not make me go away. 8 law firms. You know, I battled the case, and I exposed the nursing home industry. When T.B. Renfro, my client, died, he was on the front page of the L.A. Times as a Skid Row alcoholic who launched the biggest investigation into the nursing home industry in its history. So I felt, well, I've done that, did that, and now go back to my writing career. And about that time, I had Jan and Dean now was being, made to a movie in CBS. So I got my into Hollywood, so to speak, because you can't really sell until you sold. It's kind of a hard circle, but now I had pierced it. And I met a woman that I thought I was going to marry, had 2 kids, and so I saw my life as being pretty well set, and I probably was going to leave law. I wanted to sell the next screenplay or write a book, something to just give me a little more security and confidence, because I wanted to raise these kids and marry this woman, and so I couldn't go back to, writing in some apartment, selling magazine stories, like the Rolling Stone that did not really pay the bills,
Right.
Unless you went on a staff, and I don't think I would have wanted to do that. So I took a job at a law firm and was living a pretty normal life and thinking probably that that's what I wanted. Meanwhile, in 1976, I think it was, this woman, Frances, met Ed visiting from Los Angeles and Georgia. Ed worked from Western Union. Now, Western Union, for all the youth out there, this was long before the internet and email.
Right.
People sent messages, believe it or not, by Western Union. It's long ago, past history. It'd be like getting the original printing press.
Right.
But Western Union was still going in '76, and he fell in love with her and married her, brought her back to Los Angeles. And she had some history of emotionalism after she broke up with a boyfriend, and now she lost a job, and she was having unfounded fears about her husband, and he might want to leave her, that she wasn't holding up the marriage. She had unfounded fears that something bad was happening to her parents. She was becoming moot and sitting in a chair while they're all watching Laker game. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. And Ed decided to take her to the UCLA neuropsychiatric the next day when he got off work. But in the morning, he dropped her off at Venice Family Planning Center to see if she could get a tranquilizer. Venice does not apply tranquilizers. It is strictly birth control advice. And the person there, husband, was a donor lawyer to Synanon, and she said, why don't you go to Synanon? Maybe they can help you.
Gotcha.
And she took a taxi cab ride. And as she said, going up the steps, that someone said to her, don't go in there, you'll never come out. But she went in, and she went upstairs, and she answered a few questions. Do you want Synanon's help? Yes. Will you do what we said? Yes. And then they came up, and she had waist-long hair, and they shaved it all off, bald.
Wow.
And then they took her by the wrist into an apartment across the street, and the next morning put her in a bus to Marin County.
Right.
When she'd ask for her husband, they would say, well, he knows where you are. He obviously doesn't love you. We're your family now. Meanwhile, they called the husband, and he was coming down there, and he was being told he wouldn't be allowed to see her, and males gathered around the desk and sort of pushed him out. And he then began writing letters to the president, to the press, to senators, went to the police, everyone, and couldn't believe it that he's not allowed to see his wife.
And she walked into the original Synanon Center. That's the Del Mar Hotel. The Del Mar Hotel, just for people who don't know, is a big building that housed Synanon just south of the Santa Monica Pier in downtown Santa Monica, right by the ocean. Just wanted to get that.
Yeah, it was, I think, built in the 1920s or something like that, and it was actually during World War II, it was taken over as a military headquarters. And then after the war ended, it went back to becoming an elite club for the young and rich to go to on the beach of Santa Monica. Young stockbrokers and attorneys and professional people. And but it wasn't making enough money, and Synanon was able to purchase it in '67.
Gotcha. So this woman was taken up to another Synanon, and that's Synanon. Their place somewhere in Marin County, right? Right, gotcha.
Right. It was a much bigger facility. They were building a city in Marin County. So Ed ran into a former girlfriend, accompanied by her current boyfriend, and he told the story. And her current boyfriend said, I had a neighbor who got all these guys out of nursing homes, and maybe he can get your wife out of Synanon, and gave him my number.
Gotcha.
And so when I came in that next Monday, after spending a weekend with my woman and her kids, there was a phone call that Edwin called, and I telephoned him, and he started crying. He was just crying his eyes out. And somewhere in all the tears, I said, stop crying. I'll get her back. I guarantee it.
And
that was the start.
so that was the start. Can you talk a little bit about Synanon, the organization itself, and the kind of the head person who started Synanon, Charles Diederich?
How much detail do you want?
Well, I mean, just the audience, I suspect, I didn't know anything about Synanon before I had read the book. I knew a little bit about it through one of its offshoots, but I really
at
didn't
one
know.
time, I suggested when people were talking about making a documentary to call it the cult that time has forgotten.
I see.
It amazes to me. It's like, of course, I meet people who don't know who Patty Hearst was, but it still amazes me that how fast Synanon has, because it was a big story. It was a really big story. It occupied the headlines of newspapers and magazine features from its conception in '58 to its end in 1991.
Right,
For one period of time, when they tried to kill me, it was the biggest story in the country.
Wasn't
And
Synanon
then
like a massive landowner? They owned tons of property in Santa Monica. Isn't that
they
true?
were the biggest landowner, Santa Monica landowner.
Gotcha.
And they were worth in the '70s about $33 million, which just, Jonestown was by comparison, I think, was $6 million.
Gotcha.
And of course, Jonestown occurred 6 weeks after Synanon. Yet history has gone on to always repeat and tell the story of Jonestown. But Synanon was actually far more dangerous. Jonestown erupted within and exploded with a massive suicide, which has happened many times in history. It was to happen, after Jonestown. What Synanon is that they developed a hit squad that went out and attacked people from the West Coast to the East Coast. There was 3 attempted murders, and from their own documents, I'm able to put together about 88 beatings, physical contacts. And it was an organization that had political connections. Diederich was offered, and his wife were offered posts by our current governor, and back when his first time he was governor in the '70s, and he was, the subject of 4 or 5 books. They made a motion picture on Synanon, Columbia Studios, with Edmund O'Brien playing Charles Diederich, the founder.
Talk a little bit about Diederich and what, not just the Imperial Marines, but what they kind of instituted and what they believed they could do for the individual.
Well, let me say something just a comment about what people believe. In destructive cults, and it's defined a destructive cult as generally where the people are the servants of the organization rather than the organization existing to serve its members. And usually the leader is sociopathic and has no problem controlling people's lives and directing them to do their bidding. Now, the way that they get them to do their bidding is that they create a belief system or a set of beliefs or change it and then convince the followers, and that's the motivation, or the carrot with the stick. But in 95 or more percent of the time, the leader doesn't actually believe the beliefs. He's just creating them as a sales pitch. And I would apply that to every case that I know of. So
that was interesting that in your book you stated that even though the cults changed, you felt like you were fighting the same person.
Yeah, that's true. I felt like I was fighting the same personality over and over again, whether his name was Charles Diederich, Werner Erhard, L. Ron Hubbard. My concerns today are over the future, president-elect.
The same kind of personality traits.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of things the president-elect said I've seen come out of the mouths of cult leaders, including saying I have a movement I will, bring back waterboarding and a lot more. And I want to hold rallies where everyone comes out and cheers me. These are, things that
Well, those are
cause great
similar to the
concern.
things that Diederich did in Synanon, right? Didn't he have like attack groups and he used to
It's
speak
it,
over the wire or something? Can you talk
it's
about
it's
that?
it's consistent with George Orwell's predictions, and it's consistent with Nazi Germany. Yeah, I would say the first thing to explain about Diederich is his childhood. He was born in Toledo, Ohio. His father was a salesman, and his mother was a stage pianist. They were upper middle class, probably, but the father died when he was 4 in a automobile accident, drunk. And his mother made Chuck the favorite of the 3 kids that she had, and she was the oldest, and he was sort of at a very early age made into the man of the family. And 4 years later, his youngest brother dies of the flu. We're talking about a time in which, they didn't have the, the drugs that we have today. The flus were like epidemics, wiping out millions of kids. But when he was 12, his mother remarried a very rich man in Toledo, and Diederich became jealous that his role as the leader of the house was taken from him. And by that time, he started to drink, rebel rouse, and had a sort of a life as a party person, to be the opposite of his father-in-law, who was conservative and religious and financially successful. Chuck tried Notre Dame and flunked out elsewhere, and finally gets a job for the Standard Oil Company, and he Gulf Oil, excuse me, and he becomes a salesman for them and has some success. Marries. He has a son, and but he's just becoming more and more of a drunk. She finally throws him out of the house, and he decides to go to California and be a beach bum. When he arrives in California, he ends up working for Hughes Tool, and finds his way to, when he marries a second time, and that one ends marriage the way the first one does. He's just too drunk, and she's had enough, and he had a daughter in the second marriage. After they divorced, the second wife's new boyfriend, when she broke up with him, shot her, killed her in front of Chuck's daughter, J.D.
Wow.
So J.D. ends up coming into Synanon, and she will become later the heir successor.
Gotcha.
When Diederich became an AA fanatic and rose within AA, he volunteered for an experiment that was being done to see whether or not a new drug might help alcoholics stop drinking. And the drug was LSD. And Diederich took it and had this great experience where he believed that he saw the world as it is. There was no good, there's no bad, it just is. And went through a period of reading philosophy books, psychology books, and then began to speak in those tones at AA instead of the normal religious tones. And he developed a following that would come to his apartment after the AA meetings, and they would enter into a circle and play what was later to become called the game. And the idea was you can scream and attack anyone's behavior, and you don't even have to be telling the truth. You can say anything you want to have a cause and effect. And a couple addicts came around and were allowed to participate. AA in those days did not allow addicts in because of the belief it could not be cured. and they would just rob and steal. And these addicts stopped shooting while they were there, although later they would go back to it. And more addicts came around. The alcoholic people didn't want them. And AA said they can't come to meetings. And so Diederich stood up at AA and, accused them of bigotry and everything. He made his decision. And his decision was, well, you got AA for the alcoholics, but there's no one for the addicts. So he tossed out the alcoholics and kept the addicts. And at first it was just a small storefront in Venice called the Tender Loving Care Club.
Right.
But when they found the name was taken, when they finally incorporated in '58, someone had smeared the word for their games. They were called Rule Synanons at the time. And actually, they were called seminars or symposiums, and someone slurred the word together and got Synanon. And Diederich spelled it in the sand, and the beach played with the words, and then he said it would look good on the trucks. And so in 1958, Synanon was born.
And Diederich said it would one day be bigger than Coca-Cola, right?
Right. And a lot of people thought that, this was finally the birth of Camelot. And in some sense it was. I mean, Synanon was actually in this history of quest for utopia, it maybe got closer than most.
Interesting.
It got to the tip, but, it's like if you read George Orwell or if you believe in his philosophies, mankind could never create utopia because he's too flawed. And in the end, it will crumble.
And that's kind of how it played out in Synanon. I mean, even though they attracted people like Leonard Nimoy, Robert Wagner, they had their own kind of strange kind of doctrines and phrases that they used for their stuff. They, talked about
every cult does. Every cult makes its own language. Whether or not it's Scientology, Synanon, Moonies, and Lifton, Dr. Robert J. Lifton, in his book on the brainwashing of the prisoners of war, said that everyone thinks they're becoming smarter because they're learning these new phrases and these new words. But he says it's actually reducing your capacity to think because your language is being reduced to small phrases.
Right, gotcha.
And to repeating small phrases. So you're actually not, it's the language of non-think.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, all those phrases and terms. And I mean, he was basically like a human potential. It became a human potential movement, right? From kind of drug rehab.
Yes. I mean, I could go on for a long time about Maslow, who was sort of the creator of all this. But see, Synanon just copied, as it went along, sort of whatever was popular at the time. So in the 50s, you had the coffee houses and the beatniks. And so the image of Synanon was a coffee house and where people played bongos. And so Hollywood sort of discovered it. Charlton Heston, like I said, Natalie Wood, Lucille Ball. Everyone was coming down, Steve Allen, because they wanted sort of an escapism, they thought, from, if anything, from the phoniness of Hollywood. Synanon was real. People talked, supposedly, about real problems and the problems they had growing up, and it was very attractive. The amount of non-addicts who would come to their Saturday night parties and donate money just kept growing and growing, and Synanon became more and more famous.
And then it just kind of went sour. I mean, you talked about the Imperial Marines. You talked about some of their strange stuff.
Well, it's a lot slower process than that. It's in my other book, Miracles to Madness. I only tell the story of Synanon. It's a huge book, 670 pages, and it's meant to be the most complete study of one group that you'll ever see. I had every newspaper ever written on Synanon. I had all their memos. I had tape recordings of Diederich, and I was able to put together this amazing story in history. But it was, first the addicts began to use the language of the street, the swear words, and they were allowed in the game so you could, attack people. You were not allowed to commit violence, and you were not allowed to threaten violence. The belief was that that would stop people from speaking. And then also, if there was violence, that the police were waiting to tear them down. Synanon was born in controversy. You had a group of criminologists like Louis Yablonsky and different people that thought it was, the greatest thing in the world. And you had a senator tell John F. Kennedy that it's a miracle on the beach. Santa Monica was against it. They did not want a beacon attracting addicts from all over the country who would then fail and then, occupy Santa Monica.
Right.
They wanted Synanon, gone. And they arrested Diederich for operating a hospital without a license and out of zone. At that point, using a National Guard armory that was located on the beach right on the edge of Santa Monica. And Governor Brown Jr. signed a bill, Pat Brown Sr., his father, signed a bill in 1961 that exempted Synanon from health licensing under accepting the Synanon argument that the public had failed in curing drug addicts. So keep the state out of Synanon and let Synanon go its own way and find its own cure.
Gotcha.
And that was accepted. There was a very powerful minority view that Synanon didn't cure anybody but absorbed people, and that it had cultist aspects, and that one day there would be a state of mind in Synanon that they were afraid of. Turns out that those people were the ones who had a better crystal ball. But you can't blame the people who jumped on Synanon's wagon, because they had, from the beginning, like 13, 14 people, average age, say 35, 36 years old, that had robbed banks, that had, done stick-ups, that had, been hooked on heroin since they were, 15 or 14, who now were living lives that were envious. And a large part of that was that they had reached an age where they were tired of the streets. They had reached an age where they were ready to commit to something, to get off drugs. And then Synanon sort of made the discovery that, one is there was hope, because at that time in 1958, the idea that you could ever cure a heroin addict was thought to be impossible. There was no hope. We might as well just give him his drugs or shoot him.
Gotcha.
And Synanon had showed that, if you put a roof over their head, take away their problems by giving them a bed, feeding them friends, not only friends, but the people that they knew on the street that they used to shoot with are the people who are telling them, don't do it anymore, and look at me, look how I look today, and you can look like this. And so there was, a discovery.
Right. So they were able to cure people, but how did Synanon kind of generate its funds?
Well, they had people donating. They had the game club, and then Diederich was a pretty smart businessman, making some deals on property. A gas station company let them buy some gas stations that they ran. But the biggest thing was they got a stamp machine that allowed them to stamp products. So this was your promotional items for big business. So you would go to, say, a Fortune 500 company and say, here, order your giveaway pens with your name stamped on it, but also stamped on it would be Synanon. And the message was, if you buy from us, not only do you get a tax write-off, but you save a life. And that was a pretty big sales pitch, and that brought in, eventually they've become the second largest supplier of promotional items in the United States.
Right, so it was like merch or something like that is what
And
they
there were always businesses, and then, as they developed more and more businesses, the changes in Synanon came in 66. Diederich actually saw Synanon as a failure. The actual percentages of people staying off drugs, no one really knew, but from what they could piece together, it was, maybe 3%, 2%. It just wasn't succeeding.
Gotcha.
A large part was they were getting younger people. A lot of people coming, on the information. A lot of people came there just to get clean for a while and then leave. They didn't have the same dedicated people that they had in the beginning. And so Diederich saw it as a failure. It's funny because I don't. I think it was more successful than he thought it was. But he then began to recruit the squares. Squares were non-addicts, and he saw them as what he needed to run the businesses and to develop it into utopia and to create the new society. And for this, he developed the Synanon trip, which was a process that I believe that Warren Earhart copied when he made the S training. The idea that you come for a weekend, you're not allowed to sleep, you use a lot of meditative states, people are attacked verbally, shown to be, that they're assholes, and the message being applied that there is hope, and that is total commitment to Synanon. And so through the trip experience, squares were then sucked into Synanon. They would turn over all their money and their wealth. And it's very interesting, both with Jonestown, with Synanon, and a lot of these groups that started helping poor people, that really changes in them where they became sort of crazy and violent is when the middle class started entering.
Interesting.
And, it's kind of interesting. It seems to be a common thing. But the people from the middle class, some of them are coming because they want the power.
Gotcha.
Who are these people? Most of them are good people, but they're just lonely. They're unhappy. They don't particularly like freedom. They want someone to carry a big stick, a big daddy, and tell them what to do and how to live, and give them their meals and their jobs and their friends, and most of all, give them a purpose in life.
Gotcha.
And that is always a large part of the population at all times in history. That's why we have cults over and over and over again,
Right.
is because you have this group of people, and they do live better and happier in such environments. The trick is to keep it from going bad. Well, in Synanon's case, Diederich in 1967, he said there's no more graduation. No one ever leaves. This is a cradle to grave. That's why a lot of people think that the Eagles song, Hotel California, was actually written about Synanon.
That's interesting. So how did the Eagles know? How did the Eagles know about Synanon?
Well, everyone knew about Synanon. I'm telling you, Synanon was big news. And and also there's this connection between jazz and musicians and Synanon because those are the people who hooked on drugs. So a lot, musicians and jazz musicians went into Synanon. But from this period, they never came out. So that to leave was no longer allowed. The idea was that Synanon was a failure, and that the only way that someone stays off drugs is to stay here forever.
Gotcha. What do you think that Synanon's peak membership was?
About 1800, 2000.
That was what, in the mid-70s, early 70s?
Yeah.
And what?
It just kept steadily growing each year. In the 60s when he closed it, it was probably about 580, something at that time. But when he built a city in Morantz County where it could be a cradle of the great society, he instituted containment. And containment meant that you don't leave the facility. We have our own movie theaters, we have our own restaurants, we have our own food, all entertainment is here. You don't associate with non-Synanon people. You don't leave unless you're in a group of people that go out together. And containment was basically the death of Synanon. Because now in a world that's contained, you now got George Orwell's 1984. You've got the wire, the speakers, the public address system. But Diederich is now surrounded by yes men. Nobody who will say no to him. And everyone will reinforce his any idea. And no one's having any source of information or contact other than Synanon.
Synanon and the wire.
So
Can you explain what the wire was and how that functioned?
They set up speakers all throughout. They had, later they built a city in the Badger Mountains in Visalia, and then one in Lake Havasu. And the wire was a broadcasting system. There was a radio station, and it was 24 hours, and it was in all the bedrooms, all the hallways, the bathrooms, and, Diederich could patch in with a microphone and speak any time. And then there was always your DJ who would be playing news, and they would play over tapes of Diederich speaking, and eventually the major conversation on the wire was the enemies and getting the enemies.
Gotcha.
It was 1984. Everyone says when 1984 arrived, they said, well, it never happened. Orwell was wrong. The fact is it happened in 1977.
Gotcha. And Synanon became increasingly violent around that time too. Is that correct?
Synanon commenced violence in 74. And I can tell you how that happened if you want.
Yeah, please do.
The IRS, because of the squares moving in, began to challenge the idea that Synanon was a charity and should be not have to pay taxes if they really were running businesses and supporting a lifestyle. And seeing this battle coming, Diederich and his law people, Dan Garrett, Howard Garfield, they plotted together and decided that the way to keep their tax status was to become a religion.
Kind of like Scientology.
And it also, the same way somewhat the same way Scientology came in. Scientology came into existence over a legal decision that said it was a fraud to make the representations that it would, of all its cures, that they could only make a religious representation of belief, but not scientifically. And so Dianetics ended, Scientology was born. In Synanon, it was, we want to not pay taxes, so we become a religion. Now, another thing that they did was, now up to this point, you remember Diederich's younger brother dying of the flu and the role he had as a small kid. Diederich walked away from his son and moved to California, he walked away from his daughter. He had never shown any interest in kids. In fact, on tape recordings, you have him just basically say he doesn't like them. And so inside Synanon, babies were taken from their mothers at 6 months and put in a hatchery where they would be raised by the community, and parents were discouraged from ever seeing their kids. They don't belong to you, they belong to Synanon. But by now, you've had kids who had grown up and been 18, and they basically leave. And Diederich says, well, we spend all this money feeding and raising them, and then they leave. So we don't profit from this. So why do it anymore? So he basically orders, starts a vow of childless to have no children. But first, he says, we're going to take in the teenagers who are troubled and apply the Synanon system to them. And the Synanon system was to put them in the game, make them work jobs, and to strict punishments and a system of rewards and punishments and orders to act a certain way or you will be punished. And they then applied to juvenile departments and to the state and said, hey, don't spend your money putting these kids in juvenile hall. Send them to us, and we'll fix them. And this became known as the Punk Squad. And these kids were streetwise and really didn't want to be there and wanted to get back. And so the Synanon system didn't work at all. And Diederich got frustrated. He felt they should be respected by these punks. And so he ordered that you could hit them in the face, kick them in the ribs, knock them to the ground, and then just put them in a game to discuss them why they got treated that way. And they even kept logs on it, which I have. I knew they beat up. And then eventually it spread to even the kids that were born there. If they acted out, they could be subject to this treatment. And then if a kid tried to escape, he was beaten. And if a kid tried to steal money or something to help him escape, there's one kid, Clifford Zipperary, they brought him up on the stage, and 4 people were beating him up while it was played on the wire so that everyone could hear him screaming.
Wow.
Diederich called it a carom shot that affected the behavior of one person. It spread, and then it was people who stole from Synanon to go out and teach them a lesson. And from there, it was just a short jump to anybody who says anything bad about Synanon, anybody who does anything to harm Synanon. And then Diederich trained the Imperial Marines as a hit force to go out and get the enemies of Synanon, which is seen as lawyers, the media, or anybody who would say or do anything against Synanon. And that's how it went from nonviolent to violent. Diederich even announced it in a press conference in 1977 that the rule of nonviolence was no more.
And you got caught up in the violence, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. This is Paul Morantz. He's going to finish up this incredible story about his involvement or his knowledge of the cult Synanon in Santa Monica when we return on the next hour. Thank you.